a sweater.
So, howdy. How you doing? Good. How are you? Good to see you. Howdy. I'm with
everybody. Thanks for coming out.
One of your guys.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here. You ever get hydrated? You know. I'd like to make a motion to speak for all of us so we can get out of the sun. Hopefully we can.
All right, thank you for being here today. Thank you to Adam, Brandon, and Freedomworks for putting on this press conference today. You know, there's no greater responsibility the House of Representatives has but to manage and control the nation's finances, the nation's ability to meet our obligations, to appropriately fund our government when necessary, and only when necessary to borrow to meet those obligations. And the greatest reflection of where the people are politically is the House of Representatives. It's proportionate across the country. Each person across the country equally represented by their member of Congress. And the American people gave us the majority back in November because we ran on fiscal responsibility. We ran on combating the Biden agenda. We ran against the reckless spending, the unprecedented amount of spending. For the first time in the history of the country, $10 trillion of new government spending in the first 2 years of administration. Now a record $32 trillion in national debt, approximately $100,000 per American citizen. We will spend this year about $20,000 per American citizen, only about 15% of which, only about $3,000 per citizen of which will be for the primary responsibility of the federal government, which is the safety and security of the nation. And back in January, when this new Congress formed, when we voted in a speaker, there was an agreement to go back to pre-COVID level spending for non-defense discretionary spending. This Republican majority was united for the first 5 months of the year, passing strong Republican legislation. That's what the country gave us the majority to do, to pass Republican legislation to reverse the harmful policies of the Biden, Schumer, and then Pelosi agenda. We passed the Limit, Save, Grow, which was a significant step towards fiscal responsibility, had lots of good components to it, like the H.R. 1 energy bill, the H.R. 2 border bill, and eliminating much of the Biden reckless, woke agenda that's harming the country. And then we passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, or what I call the Failed Responsibility Act. We failed the American people with the FRA, which essentially kept in place all the Biden spending. Everyone who voted for that bill essentially owned the Biden agenda, the Biden spending, for the remaining 1.5 years of this Congress. However, it was said by leadership at that time that we will use the appropriations process, that the FRA was the ceiling, not the floor. But we would go back to pre-COVID level spending for non-defense discretionary, and we're calling on Republicans to do that very thing. Sadly and unfortunately, there are some Republicans in the House who don't want to cut spending. Worse yet, many Republicans in the Senate want to actually increase spending. But we are committed to using every tool at our disposal to going back to the 1.471 pre-COVID level spending for non-defense discretionary, allowing defense to stay at the current levels. And my colleagues behind us and our friends at the Freedomworks are united in doing that. That the Republican appropriations bills ought to implement Republican priorities, reversing the reckless, harmful, dangerous policy of the Biden administration, and take a step towards putting us on fiscal responsibility. So I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues from the House Freedom Caucus. I'm proud to stand here with our friends at Freedomworks. And I'll turn it over to Adam, Brandon from Freedomworks, and then he'll introduce the next House Freedom Caucus speaker. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you very much. Good job, Bob. So Adam Brandon, I'm the president of Freedomworks. I want to thank you all for joining today. We're here, we're bringing our activists in. The activists we brought in tend to come from swing districts. And the reason we're trying to bring people in from these swing districts is that this is a big issue that's not just a conservative issue or a Republican issue, but we're heading to $50 trillion in debt in the next 10 years. So $30 trillion, that we may look back at this in the salad days at some point. This is the beginning of the spending fights. We're not even talking about entitlements yet. We're just talking about making some steps, some first steps in getting our spending under control. Admiral Mullins a few years ago, when talking about the greatest threat to the United States, it wasn't Russia, it wasn't China, it was our debt and deficit, it was our spending. So we are proud, our activists, after the gentlemen are done speaking here, they're going to go visit with their congressman to say, like, we're just at the very beginning. What these folks are asking for is very reasonable. These are the first steps in getting our fiscal house in order. And we intend as an organization to be involved in this wave of the fight and future waves, because this fight is years to come, because we are done kicking the can down the road. We're running out of room. This is a wake-up call, $30 trillion in debt. We're going to soon be paying more in interest than we do in defense. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Congressman Norman. Congressman Norman, please take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. What a privilege and honor it is to be here. And I want to thank Freedomworks and all the patriots that we met with last night that have been active in this fight. And folks, I will tell you, this is a fight for the freedom of America. This is the heart and soul of America. Economic security is national security. And I'm tired of hearing it'll be next year, or this affects it 5 years down the road. As Adam said, we are approaching $50 trillion in debt. It's going to be more so as time goes on. The interest alone will exceed with the defense budget. And I would say when you add Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid to it, we're far greater than the 32 that we've been talking about. The spending for the last, since 2018, has increased 33%. Folks, that's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. Isn't it imagine we're trying to give the taxpayers back money. We're trying to redirect funds. There is no reason in the world with our military budget that we ought to be having spending on woke programs. We stop that. We've got to stop that. There's no reason in the world we ought to be putting money for an FBI building. And if you want to stop a program, cut the funding. And that's what you're seeing the patriots behind me and the House Freedom Caucus willing to do. Because, folks, if we don't do it now, tell me when. And I'm just excited that we're addressing it now. We have got 16 days left to get the appropriations bill out for the next budget cycle, which is October 1. We're out in August, but hopefully we're going to address it, and we're going to, as has been said, as Bob Good said, we want the 22 levels, and we want no rescissions. No smoke and mirrors for the American people, folks. It's time to present a budget that trims the fat, goes to programs that will defend and protect this country. We ought to be spending money for ships, for planes, for cybersecurity, not for transgender surgeries, not for puberty blockers, not for the woke programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Folks, what we're voting on today should not be a social experiment, and that's what the programs have become to be. We are going to, in the next 16 days, you'll see it play out, where we examine all the 12 appropriation bills and let the American people decide, are we being unreasonable? The problem with Washington, D.C., the reason it's broken, every dollar spent has got an advocate for it. The problem is we need an advocate for the American taxpayer, and that's what we're going to do. And now, my pleasure to introduce Matt Rosendale.
Hello, and thank you everybody for coming out today. Basically, what we're going to watch over the next several weeks is the House of Representatives going to keep their word. When we passed the Limit, Save, and Grow Act earlier this year, we made a commitment to the American people. We were going to reduce spending. We were going to freeze the spending levels, and we were going to make sure that we removed all of the woke spending programs that the Biden administration has put forward over the last couple of years out of the spending, because that's what the American people sent us forward to do. And the only way that we're going to be able to make sure that we do that is if we see all 12 of these appropriation bills totaled up so we know what the total spending is. If the leadership believes that they're going to be able to trickle these out 2 at a time, 3 a week, 4 a week, that's just not going to be feasible, because we will never be able to see what the total spending is until the very end. And when we then try to uphold our commitment, our word to the American people that we will not push spending beyond the $1.471 trillion for non-defense discretionary. And if we have one piece of legislation left that we have to try and make up 50, 60, 70 billion dollars, that's not going to be acceptable. We want to see all 12 of the appropriation bills. We want leadership to uphold their end of the deal. And that way, 218 members of Congress that voted to curb spending, to rein in spending, can actually get the job done. I heard the minority leader speak last week when we passed the National Defense Authorization Act. And he said, you know, this is woefully irresponsible. It's woefully irresponsible. It was woefully irresponsible what they've been doing for the last 2 decades. They have gutted out our military, and then they wonder why as they sit in their rooms and look at each other and see why is the recruitment numbers down across the board. That's why. Because the brave young men and women that have the ability and the desire to defend our country are concerned about the people that are actually running the enterprise, the mechanism that's going to help them do that. So what you will see is who's going to stand up for the advocates, for the regular people across this nation. And that's what you'll see over the next couple of weeks. I am pleased to be here with all of them. And now I would like to introduce my good friend, Representative Self from the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Matt. Well, I'm from Texas, and it's finally getting warm enough that we can hold a press conference today. I am proud to stand with the members behind me. They are all members of the 20. Back in January, we said we were going to change the culture of Congress, and we're still at it today. Because make no mistake, what you're going to hear is these cuts are draconian. Folks, we're talking about less than 2% of all spending that this government will do in the next year. Less than 2%. You're going to hear that we have made rescissions to get down to the number that you heard, the 1.471. But then those rescissions are going to be added back later. Watch for it. That should not happen. If we go down to the 1.471, we stay there because that was the agreement in January. Watch for it. I'm proud to introduce my friend, the member of Congress, Andy Ogles.
Well, good morning or afternoon. It's hot out here, so I'll be brief. You know, I first want to thank Freedomworks for standing with us, for taking a stand, for being an advocate for less spending. And when I think about the $32.6 trillion worth of debt that we're racing towards $50 trillion worth of debt, I liken our economy to the Titanic. We're on a course, and there's a collision ahead. It's a big ship that turns slowly. But if we course correct today, we can avoid the disaster that lies ahead. The current trajectory we're on is unsustainable. And we owe it to the American people to make cuts. Otherwise, like the Titanic, this will end in catastrophe. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Andy Biggs from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. First of all, thank you to Adam Brandon and these folks from Freedomworks who are out here and who constantly work on behalf of American people. And I encourage all similar groups, get involved, let your voices be heard. That's what this great country is about. It's governed by the people. I also thank my colleagues from the Freedom Caucus behind me and those who were with us in the 20. And also thank some of the members of the media. No, I thank all of you for being I thank all of you for being out here today. It's warm and it's humid, and I come from Arizona. It's a dry heat out there, I can tell you that. So let's talk about what this means. Even if you move to the 2022 levels of spending for discretionary funding for non-military spending, that $1.8 trillion in spending will be borrowed. Every penny of that will be borrowed. So that you're looking at $32 trillion in national debt today. A year from now, it will be in excess of $34.5 trillion because as we finish out the fiscal year and move on. That's what you're looking at, the national debt, which is a threat to our national security for many reasons. And I encourage my colleagues to join me, and I call upon the Speaker to bring my bill, the national debt is a security threat to the floor. $1.8 trillion more in national debt, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I have staunchly encouraged us to go back to 2019 discretionary levels across the board. Wouldn't it be nice if for just 3 months or 6 months we didn't spend more than we brought in every month? But on average, we spend about $125 billion more every month than we bring in revenue. And that's even when we had record revenue. It's not a revenue problem here. It is a spending problem. And the only way we get it under control is to have the courage to say, you know what, in 2019, pre-COVID, nobody was saying, gee, we're underfunded. We're too small as a federal government. Nobody was saying that. So why not get back to those 2019 levels? Well, I thank you for being here. We're sounding the warning call. We're reminding our leadership, you need the votes, and we're begging our leadership, listen to us. Do not take us on a further irresponsible spending path and tell us that you're, I want to use that dog and the raining thing, Matt, that Representative Rosendale tells me all the time. Don't tell us it's raining when it's not. Don't tell us it's raining when it's not rain. Let's have the truth. Let's be honest. Let's allow participation from the American people, but also their elected representatives, all of us. Thanks for being here. We're going to keep fighting, and we'll take a few questions now. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Biggs. With the House in session just 15 more days before the end of the fiscal year, are you concerned that failing to pass these bills could lead to a government shutdown in October? And then, given that the Senate is controlled by Democrats, do you believe that your version of these bills has any chance of being enacted?
So that's what we call a compound question back in my previous life. So let me answer the end. I don't believe that you're looking at a government shutdown. I think what you'd be looking at is, as I think Bob, Representative Good, and Representative Rosendale and others have mentioned, you'll see some aspects, some of the 12 appropriations bills come out in what we call a minibus, and then you'll see a short-term continuing resolution to continue spending. I am not worried about a government shutdown at this point. I think that they'll continue on, and then to try to run it out till December, to be honest with you. But that's my own perspective. I know I'm not speaking for everybody else. Bob, did you want to answer?
Yeah, I would add to that, we should not fear a government shutdown. Right. Most of what we do up here is bad anyway. Most of what we do up here hurts the American people. When we do stuff to the American people while promising to do things for the American people, essential operations continue. 85%, as Mr. Biggs has just given me that number, continues. Most of the American people won't even miss if the government is shut down temporarily. But our speaker has an opportunity to be a transformational historical speaker that stared down the Democrats, that stared down the free spenders, that stared down the president and said, no, we're going to do what the American people elected us to do. And the House is going to say no. We're going to pass a good Republican bill out of the House and force the Senate and the White House to accept it. Or we're not going to move forward. What would happen if Republicans, for once, stared down the Democrats and were the ones who refused to cave and to betray the American people and the trust they put in us when they gave us a majority? So we don't fear a government shutdown.
Next question. Yep.
I had a question actually for Congressman Rosendale, but of course if you guys want to add, you had mentioned that you all went to see the appropriations bill so you could see the total amount.
Exactly.
Do you guys believe that leadership is purposely withholding it to try to force a vote at the last minute?
It may be. You'll have to ask them that. But what I will tell you is that we are united in the belief that we have to see what the entire cost is before we can start working on individual pieces of it. Because, again, you will be left with a very small piece of that pie that we might have to take a lot of the spending out of. So the best way, the most reasonable and the smartest way to handle it is to look at all 12 bills together so we can see what the total spending is and make sure we're at that 1.471.
So you've requested that and they haven't complied with that request?
We haven't been denied that yet, and that's what we're going to see play out over the next, I would say, week, okay, is whether we're going to be able to get all of those bills together.
Yeah.
Yep. What are you going to do this week? Are you going to support a rule to bring the milk on and ag approach bills to the floor? Or do you need some changes to those
We have to, the question is, will we support Milcon and VA and the ag bills coming to the floor this week? We haven't even seen what's in there. I don't believe they're actually even drafted yet. We need to see what's in there. We need to know what's in there. We need the 72 hours that they promised they'd give us on every bill and be able to read those and digest them before we make a decision on that. Chad. The question is, who do I, me personally, I won't speak for anybody else. Yeah, so I think the low-hanging fruit is Mayorkas, Secretary Mayorkas. I won't even get into that, but with the evidence that we've adduced in the Oversight Committee and Judiciary Committee with regard to the Biden, what I would call a crime syndicate, I don't know what else you can call it, the corruption that's there, that would certainly be a very interesting and perhaps even necessary step. I would say we probably should, before we talk about impeachment, move on to an impeachment inquiry to actually get more teeth into our investigations and allow us to expand and broaden those investigations and use to bring more witnesses, bring in more evidence. I'll just tell you that the evidence that I've seen is overwhelming, and it would lead one to believe that our president, our sitting president, is corrupted and compromised. So, next question. Oh, this guy. Chad,
let me just say this too. It's all the above. Look at the evidence that we have. We hadn't had hearings before the Republicans took over in January. And, you know, pick one. I mean, the president is the head of the free world. What it looks like this guy has done, forget the damage he's doing to this country while he's in office, but the money he's accepted, it appears, what his son's involved with, if that's not pay to play, I don't know what is. But let the evidence lead us there. And then people ask me all the time, where are the consequences? You know, Hillary Clinton, we had all these hearings, where are the consequences? And the same thing now. It's got to be consequences. And I realize the replacement for Joe Biden is probably giggling somewhere now. So she's not an alternative, but there's got to be consequences, and it starts with the head of this country.
Last question.
You mentioned CR and minibuses till December. Was that something y'all could support? The continuing resolution?
I would not support that personally. I don't know what the rest of my colleagues would say.
I agree.
Would you support a minibus?
No.
You'd have to see each
No.
12 voted
No, the 12, look, they promised us 12 bills. They're going to try to push through 2 this week. I understand why they need to push through 2, but we haven't seen the language. They promised us 72 hours, and they need to deliver on that as well. The reality is, my biggest concern is that they're going to cram through a couple of minibuses and a CR, and then you're in for a world of hurt because there'll be a lot of pressure to do something particularly onerous, like they're very comfortable to do. And let's not forget that Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell are very comfortable with doing omnibus bills late in the year, and that's it. We'll see how we strategize that later on. But thank you all for being here. We're done. Thank you.